Good evening. I'm Nicholas Bauman, president of the Kappa chapter in Pi Gamma Mu, and I would like to welcome you to the 32nd Merrill E. Gaddis Lecture. First and foremost, immediately following this lecture, we're going to have a reception in the room right adjacent to us. The Gaddis Lecture was created in honor of Dr. Merrill Gaddis, who was a professor of history at Central College. Dr. Gaddis founded the Kappa chapter in 1935 and later served as regional chancellor of the Honorary Society. Our guest speaker tonight is a CMU alumnus who graduated in 2009. Among his many accomplishments, he graduated CMU with a major in religion and a minor in psychology. He later graduated from the Harry S. Truman School of Public Affairs at the University of Missouri with a Master of Public Administration. Now he holds the position of Director of Community Engagement for Missouri Secretary of State Josh Kander's U.S. Senate campaign. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Seth Bauman.
Thank you. I've been asked a lot if you're nervous, and honestly, after seeing this photo, I know each of you have this. I don't know what can get worse than that. I want to say that's an honor to be the Gaddis Lecture speaker tonight. I know this is a very special occasion. I want to thank a few people. I want to thank my family for being here, my wife Lauren, and Professor Keith Abernathy, who where you're at, there, who nominated me to be selected for this speech. There's a few individuals who I'd like to thank that are, I know one's here, Dr. Darrell Jeffries. Can you raise your hand, sir? Mary Ann Roostermeyer, I don't know if she's here or not. Yes. Coach Jeff Sherman. I have late practice. And then the last person who may not know, and so I mention these individuals because they had a huge impact on my time here at CMU. And this last person that I want to mention may not know that he had such a huge impact on me, and that's Professor Jack Healy. Is Professor Jack Healy here? Well, just a quick story about Professor Healy. I had Professor Healy for a Composition 1 creative writing class. English and grammar and I do not mix. And at the time, my wife and I, we had just got married. We were expecting our first child. I played football, I played basketball for CMU, and I had a lot on my plate, not to mention my wife thought it was a great idea to get a puppy. So I had a lot going on. I was hoping to go to Professor Healy and play the sympathy card, and I was hoping to get maybe some extra credit points, and I walked in his office asking for some help, and I walked out with more homework than I had before. And what I realized at the time was that he was really challenging me. He seen something in me that I didn't see myself. And it's moments like that were fostered here at CMU that I look back, I reflect on, and I realized that it not only gave me more self-awareness of who I was, but it gave me the confidence to believe that I could go out into society and make a difference and make a change in the lives of those that are around me. And so, as I start this lecture, I just want to ask a question just by raising hands. I see a lot of college students in here. How many of you guys want to go into public service when you graduate? Just a couple? Raise them up high. Great. Okay. And just take a quick second, and I guess everybody, if you think about it, educators, professors are in public service as well, but take a second to think about why do you want to be in public service, or why did you get into public service? And there's really no right or wrong answer, but I bet there's a commonality, and that's we all want to help people. We all want to improve the lives of those of us around us. And with that being a key factor, I wanted to, when I was asked if I would do this speech, if I would accept it, I thought about what would I say. And it took a while to kind of come to me because I started thinking about, well, I could talk about theories, I could talk about social work, I could talk about racial justice, racial disparities. I had been in a role with the Missouri Juvenile Justice Association as the DMC state coordinator, disproportionate minority contact, where I implemented a federal program through the Department of Justice. So we worked a lot on racial disparities, racial inequities, specifically the overrepresentation of minority kids in the juvenile justice system across the state. And so I had a lot of experiences where my passion lies, but what I wanted to talk to you tonight about is I started thinking about if I was in your position, if I was sitting in your seat, getting ready to become a public administrator or work in public service, what would benefit me the most? And I think that you guys are here right now under a lot of theories. Some of you may be in criminal justice, maybe sociology, psychology. And so I really wanted to bring a message of working in the system. I wanted to talk about how to create change in your community and do this through the lens of being a public servant or working in public service. And so the idea is, how can we improve our systems? How can we improve our systems in a way that we better interact or we can better serve the public at large? And so tonight I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to use my professional experience. I know it's limited. I graduated in 2009, but I have learned a few things, and I think the biggest learning curve is learning how to take this knowledge that you gain here at college and apply it in the real world. And so that's what I kind of want to talk about tonight. So in thinking about that, I started thinking about how would I sum down what I've learned. And when I first took my job as a DMC coordinator, the first thing my boss had me read was a technical assistance manual that was about that big. And I was trying to figure out how to condense that in a sense. And I came up with these 4 action steps that I want to talk about tonight. The first one is what I consider, and these are my own languages, doing your homework. And so this is where you identify the issue. So a lot of times in our society, let me just step back. When I worked in social and racial justice, it was post-Ferguson. And we did a lot of work with police departments across the state, with school districts, looking at the school-to-prison pipeline. And at that time, there was a lot of discussion about the issues that are going on. There was a lot of discussion about implicit bias. There was a lot of discussion about systemic racism. And I didn't feel like there was a lot of discussion about, well, what can we do to address these issues? What can we do as a system to respond better to our communities? And so the first thing I needed to do was understand why the issue exists. And just one of the things that we worked on in DNC was the school-to-prison pipeline. Just by show of hands, has anybody heard of the school-to-prison pipeline? A few folks? Doc, I figured you would. Pretty smart guy. Well, just a synopsis of what the school-to-prison pipeline is this phenomenon where youth of color, African-American youth, experience increased rates or disproportionate rates of harsher punishments, in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, and contact with the juvenile justice system, which contact with the juvenile justice system as a youth increases your rates to having contact with the criminal justice system as you get older. And so we call it the school-to-prison pipeline, but we needed to know where this pipeline began. And so when we say school to prison, obviously the school and where do kids go in the morning, they go to class. And so we wanted to look at how do kids get from the classroom to the juvenile system. And so what we did is from our perspective, is we broke down into these contact points. And so we wanted to look at when a kid exhibits some type of behavior, some type of misbehavior, it triggers a response from the teacher, from the educator, to do X, Y, and Z. So if a kid acts up, the teacher then has a decision to redirect this kid and keep him in class, or redirect this kid and send him on to the principal's office. And so we call that a contact point or a point of reference. And then the second contact point within the schools was at the principal's office. The principal, if the kid made it past the teacher, which at this point is not good, it gets to the principal's office, the principal, the administrator, then makes a decision whether to send the kid to the juvenile office or send a referral over to the juvenile office. And as we started to identify those contact points, we understood that there were other factors that may influence this kid's behavior back in the community. We specifically wanted to focus on the decisions that we made within the school. So as we figured that out, we wanted to ask, or we wanted to examine all the decisions that were made and ask why these decisions were being made. And then we started looking at what governed those decisions. We broke that down into 3 areas, and that was policy, practice, training, education, and direct services. And the direct services are really the options, the different programs that are out there, maybe after-school programs, truancy programs that teachers or administrators could send you to help build some more competency or to help them get through their troubled time to get back in school and get on path for an education. So just some examples of those for policy and practice we found, and some of this you can find through research, so we didn't have to conduct our own research. There's a lot of research out there. The zero tolerance policies actually influence the school-to-prison pipeline. This is where zero tolerance policy, we found that when we examined the data, we examined the decisions that were being made, we've seen that African American youth were being sent to the juvenile office for assault in the third. That was the #1 offense, and assault in the third is considered a minor crime. And some of you probably can remember in this room, I remember in high school, we got in a fight in middle school, and it wasn't that long ago that we never got a referral to the juvenile office. A lot of times the principal may sit us down and talk to us. That wasn't even an option. And so nowadays we see that for these minor infractions, for what we call status offenses as well, these kids end up in the juvenile system. We also looked at training education, and this is where, in training education, this is where if you want to become a teacher, if you want to become say youth specialist in social services, you'll go through some training, and you'll go and you'll learn some things of how to do your job. So we wanted to look at what were teachers learning, and because that helped guide their decisions, and what type of trainings did they go to. And so we realized that we needed to increase equity training. And a lot of times in equity training, there wasn't a piece on implicit bias. So we wanted to incorporate implicit bias into different trainings, conflict resolution. And I'll tell you this, it seems like, those of you that are going into education and become teachers, it seems like, and don't quote me on this, but teachers they have to wear a lot of hats, a lot of different hats. And it seems like a lot of the trainings that are coming up are geared more towards mental health, and teachers are becoming more like social workers. We think that in a way, it just gives teachers more tools in the tool belt to maybe be more effective at their job or to handle classroom misbehavior. We also wanted to incorporate an understanding of the juvenile system. And so a lot of times, educators, teachers in high school had no idea what really went on in the juvenile justice system. They had no idea. They thought, it was an option, it was a tool. We could send kids to the juvenile system, they would get help. And really, that's not what that system is designed for. That system is designed to keep the public safe. That system is designed for kids who need more intensive help and care. And then the last is direct services. And so we found out that scared straight programs don't work. We also found out that there's not a whole lot of options in the community. We found out that we needed to connect the community with these systems, with the school districts, with the police department, with the juvenile office, and then come up with more creative programs based on research, some evidence-based programs, best practice that are proven to help kids redirect their behaviors. And then the last is, again, I said this before, but teachers need a little more tools in their tool belt. So as we did that research, we looked at what the data said, and we started to pinpoint what we call peeling back this onion, peeling back the layers of what's going on and why this issue exists. We started to identify patterns, we started to identify things that we could change and be proactive before kids started or moved down the line in the school-to-prison pipeline. The second thing that I've learned is building momentum for change. So once we understand, once we've really identified what these issues are and why this issue exists, the next thing we need to do is we need to educate the key stakeholders and people that need to be at the table in order to make change occur. So I'm sure you guys have all heard that government moves slow. And it's true today as it probably was 1,000 years ago, and as it will be in the next 1,000 years, is that it's this old saying that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So we have to let our voice be heard. We have to make sure that we're going out in the community, make sure that we're doing presentations. One of the things that we initiated in Cole County was this Cole County Youth Day. And the local Rotary Club had asked me to come up with this idea to spend money pretty much. And so I was like, all right, cool. I was really trying to think of a way that I could get a new TV out of the deal or a couch or something like that. But what my mindset always went back to is helping youth, helping kids. And so we come up with this notion of having a youth day because I knew the different contributing mechanisms, the factors of why kids were being sent from school to the juvenile office in Cole County. We did our research. I knew that if we could come up with a program or come up with this youth day where we brought all these community agencies together to collaborate to create this youth day, it would benefit Jeff City because there was a lot of I guess you could say that there wasn't a whole lot of collaboration in efforts to share resources and efforts to really see what could be done to help youth. And so we came up with this idea of the Youth Day. And then we also, there was 3 different components. One of them was bringing all the community organizations together. They were set up booths and so that they could show the community what was out there. A lot of times we find that parents had no idea that there's different resources out in the community that they could use. The second was we set up these rooms where youth could come in and they had a facilitator that would ask them questions and allow them to express themselves in whichever form or fashion they wanted to. So they could draw, they could talk, they could send a text, they could, there was multiple ways that they could talk about these issues, and we had conducted a survey beforehand through the Boys and Girls Club asking youth what type of issues you see in your community, and then we, from that survey, we took the top 5 issues, and then we asked them to dig a little bit deeper into that. So we wanted to collect the youth's voice from this process and hear about what they thought they'd seen as issues in the community. And then the third phase was bringing all our community leaders together to interact with youth. And the big key to this is that we've seen that a lot of youth were disenfranchised, especially African American youth and youth with low socioeconomic status. And so we wanted to be strategic in where we held the Youth Day. So we looked at demographic data. We looked at where a lot of youth that may live either in public housing, or we found different ways that we could identify where to hold this Youth Day. We looked at transportation barriers, and so we worked with the churches to have church bands pick up youth. So we wanted to make sure that we targeted the kids that we were after. So we invited city council, we invited the county commissioners, the judges, and we really made this an opportunity where they could interact in a positive light with these individuals versus a negative light, which tends to happen more often than not. So after you let your voice be heard, there's a couple steps. The first step is determining who to invite to the table. So if we're talking about the school to prison pipeline, people that we want to invite to the table are decision makers, people that can make decisions to change the system. So we want to invite the principals, we want to invite the superintendent. Of course, things can get political, but you want to invite the folks that can kind of work from the top down. So how do you invite them? So this is one thing that I learned that I thought was probably the funnest part of my job was I felt like I had this ability to influence people, or at least I was put in a position where that's what I had to do. I needed to influence people to come to the table. As working for Missouri Juvenile Justice Association, that role helped a little bit in that I worked for, or I reported at least to the Department of Justice, and so there was always kind of this punitive overhead about getting an investigation from DOJ, which I didn't necessarily like because I don't think it made an inclusive environment where people are open enough to talk about some of these sensitive subjects. But whenever you invite people to the table, this is what I found to be true, is be passionate and believe in yourself. I read this quote, I think it was on LinkedIn maybe, someone had posted it, it was awesome. It said, people don't care about what you know until they know that you care. And And so one of the things I've always done is I've always done my homework. I've worked as hard as I could, and even when you don't have to know everything, but I've known that people have been very open when they realize that I'm here to help kids, and we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that youth have the best outcomes possible. And if that means that we have to examine what we do, the operations that we do, the decisions that we make day in and day out, we should do that for our kids. They will be the next generation. They are the next in line to run this country, and we got to make sure we do everything we can to see them succeed. So kids falling through the crack, to me, was never an option. The next was being strategic. So knowing how to tap into individuals' motivation. You wanted to look at, if we were addressing the school to prison pipeline, we looked at the school, we looked at the police department, different social and racial justice advocacy groups, but then those organizations were going to send a representative. And you wanted to identify who that representative was and maybe get an edge on how you could tap into their motivations. And so I always felt like that was important as a strategy because I've always felt myself to be kind of an altruistic person, and I want everybody to be there to help the kids, but that's not always what happens. And that's not always everybody's motivation. But if you can get them to the table, then they're at the table to listen and they can participate. The next is being persistent. This is key as well, because there's a number of times where I would make phone calls to school districts, or I would email and I would never get a response back. But follow-up is very important when you're trying to create change in the community, because over time, people start to it starts to build a relationship. The first time somebody sees you, they might not know you, they might not trust you, it's easy to say no. The second time you come through, you start seeing a familiar face. The third, fourth, fifth time, before you know it, people may give you the shot, and that's happened a few times with me. But I think it took 6 months to break into the school district, and when we were talking about examining racial disparity data, a lot of school districts don't want to open the doors. And I need to go back and just say that when we address this issue of the school to prison pipeline, it is not against the law to send a kid to the juvenile office for disorderly conduct or for any of these minor offenses that can be coded through the juvenile office or the police department. And so influence is key, because we're acting in a way. Civil disobedience is we're trying to change the law, we're trying to change the policy, but as of right now, there's nothing that we can do to actually stop this from happening. So it's very important that we have this mindset that we don't want to point the finger at anybody. We want to include everybody in the solution. And so now that you have the individuals at the table, this is probably key to the process. And this is also, it's a fun part of it, but it's a tough part of it, because everybody, again, has their own motivations, but collaboration or implementation. And this is where you get to plan for purposeful action for best outcomes. When everybody gets to come to the table, you get to have this amazing dialogue. You get to learn more about each individual system, and you get to learn some ins and outs that, because I haven't worked in the police department, I get to learn a little bit more about what the police officers actually do and how they make their decisions. And also in the school district, you get to learn why teachers do what they do and how they do what they do. But having that dialogue across the table, because police officers aren't going to know what teachers do, and teachers may not know what police officers do, and it's a very rich conversation to hear that, I didn't know that if I sent a kid to the juvenile office who may not have a parent that advocates for him, who may not have transportation or a means to get to the juvenile office, most likely that kid is going to end up getting pushed farther into the system. They're going to miss their court date. Nobody's going to be advocating for them. Our public defense system is poorly funded, and there's really nobody that's going to champion for this kid. And so when teachers see that, most teachers don't want kids to go down that path. And I can say that all the teachers I work with don't want that to happen. But it's just that awakening point. One of the examples of this collaboration, I just want to say this first, that it's no secret that we face some complex issues in our society. And the world's growing ever more complex, and so it takes complex solutions to address these issues. And just an example of what we've been able to do in Boone County, we had this multifaceted approach, this strategic plan, where there's not one thing, there's not one remedy, there's not one solution that's going to solve the school-to-prison pipeline. It's going to be a multi-layered approach, and that goes back to we're going to have to change some policies, practices. We're going to have to change and rethink about the different types of trainings that individuals get, the types of education. One of the things that I proposed while working at NJJA was that why don't we start teaching? Why don't we look at the curriculum that teachers or soon-to-be teachers go through in college, and why don't we make it mandatory that they have to take certain classes, and maybe that's a criminal justice class or a juvenile justice class to understand a little bit. So as they come out, they already have an understanding, and then vice versa with police officers, vice versa with juvenile office employees. And so why don't we already start this collaboration, this cross-agency intelligence beforehand, before we get out into the field and work. But some of the things that we were able to do, we noticed that Boone County, Columbia, Missouri, they had a lot of great things going on in the community, but they really weren't working together. Once we brought all the key stakeholders to the table, once we had that discussion, that dialogue, there were some really neat things that came about. One of the things we did, we signed an MOU, this Memorandum of Understanding, to somewhat circumvent the zero tolerance policy law, and that was that there was a little wiggle room within the provision of assaults. And the third, where the school districts had the opportunity to work together. They weren't mandated to send the referral to the juvenile office unless they enter this MOU, then they could work together. So the school district, law enforcement, the juvenile office, they signed this in order to handle these offenses in-house. And so this was a huge step because a lot of the referrals for African American youth were for assault and third. We also seen that even for white youth, assault and third and drugs was another issue, but these were considered minor offenses. But under the zero tolerance policy, if you had a drug or a weapon at school, it was automatic referral to the juvenile office. And so I had left before we had actually evaluated to see if we reduce those referrals, but I did check a while back, and our DMC numbers statewide total had dropped from 2.4 to 2.0. Another thing that we were able to implement is teen court. Has anybody here heard of teen court or youth court? It's a kind of it can be used as a diversionary program, restorative justice. We were able to implement 2 of those in Lane Middle School and West Middle School, and it's in collaboration with the school district, with the juvenile office, and with law enforcement. What this does is youth court is a restorative justice approach. So if a kid gets in trouble, say for truancy, doesn't show up for school, or gets in trouble for one of these minor offenses, instead of a referral being sent to the juvenile office, this referral goes to youth court, and then the kid has to come in front of a panel of peers, almost like a jury, and they go through the case. So the kids in this class are learning leadership skills, and this kid has to face, probably more terrifying than facing adults, you have to face your friends. And so they would give out sanction out community service, and then if the kid completed the community service within the amount of time that we had, that kid would then be able to be a part of the leadership process, and then that kid would be on the jury, and then he would get to process the next kid and such forth. And so the restorative justice piece of that is that it was handled by the youth. And I think that that's an amazing program. We tweaked it just a little bit to become more of a diversionary program to the juvenile system. But when I left, within a semester, we had 10 kids that went, 10 kids that had finished their community service. Those were 10 kids that had never seen the juvenile system. The next thing is the Boone County Youth Day, and this is pretty similar to Cole County Youth Day. We wanted the community to be aware of what was going on. And at the time, it was post-Ferguson. There was it was a very sensitive subject, topic to talk about. And so we had kind of proposed doing this public forum for a long time. We felt like it just wasn't the right time to do it. So it took about 6 to 8 months, but we finally got around to having this Boone County Youth Day, and we were able to invite the public. We did some presentations on what DMC was, what we were doing as a community to try to address DMC, to reduce DMC, and then how people could get involved. And then of course we had some activities where we had some police officers out there that could interact with youth and build that rapport. We had an officer who we selected for a few reasons that sat on a dunk tank, and that's pretty fun to do. And then also we looked at the training aspect, and so we incorporated more equity training, implicit bias training. We were able to bring in a training called Effective Police Interactions with Youth and a training called Effective School Interactions with Students. And this broke down the cognitive, the emotional and physical aspects of youth. It also had a component of implicit bias, and it really helped the educators and police officers better understand why youth make the decisions that they did and how we can better direct those youth. And so, as you can see, Boone County had a lot of different things going on at once. And then, of course, there were existing programs that we looked at to modify and to kind of look through this racial equity lens and see if there were things that we could change to better serve the kids that we've seen come through those programs. So the last thing I want to talk about, and this is just a quick one, and this is about evaluation and modifying. So as we went through the steps and we looked at, so doing your homework is key. Make sure that you know your issue and you know as much as you can about this issue. And that way when you go to build community buy-in, you can speak to this issue, you can talk about this issue. And then when you know more about it, you're able to rephrase and reframe the issue and message it in such a way that challenges can be seen as opportunities for change. The last thing is evaluating your work. You want to make sure that the programs that you developed are actually working the way that you intended them to work. One of the things that I'd seen, it was part of my role to go in and evaluate these programs and help these jurisdictions evaluate the programs. And one of the things I've seen is we created this truancy court that was designed to help African American youth, because we've seen that I guess the research said, or maybe this is more of an anecdotal evidence-based research, the juvenile officer mentioned that African American youth were truant from school, and this truancy court would help, and it would possibly reduce his DMC numbers. Well, over the year's course, 10 kids came to that program, and none of them were African American. And so it actually had an adverse effect, and I think it popped up as a DMC numbers. And, you know, it was a data game. But at the end of the day, we could sit down and say, hey, we still help the kid. So that's an important thing. So always track your data, always conduct your analysis. And as I begin to close, I just want to say that now more than ever, it's important that we come together as a society. I think anytime you turn on the news, you see something negative. Anytime you turn on social media, there's always something posted about a fight, or there's always something about racial relations or issues with racial disparities. And it's important that we not only just look at those issues on the surface, but we start to dig in and find out why these exist. And I think you guys are the next generation to really make a difference and to make a change in the problems and issues that we see in our society. And that starts with going past your emotions, going past your implicit bias of what you think the situation is, and digging into what is actually happening. We have, it's a day and age where we all have smartphones. You can go on Google, you know, professors, close your ears. Wikipedia is actually all right. And there's a lot of information out there. So we can use that information to make smarter, more informed decisions as a system. So what I would say is as a public servant is all the work that I've done has been in public service. I feel like we should always do what promotes the most positive outcome for the people that we serve. And so if we're not examining the decisions that we make, if we're not asking why are we making this decision, if we're not asking Does this decision benefit the person that I'm serving as much as it could? I don't think we're doing all that we can as public service. So I encourage you to be passionate. I challenge you to be bold and courageous, especially when we talk about racial justice. I encourage you to step up. I encourage you to have those conversations. And I encourage you to ask why. I encourage you to challenge the norms of your society and to ask if this is really what's most beneficial to the people, the lives that we're trying to change. And then last, I would say, let your commitment to improving the lives of those of you around you drive your attitude for the work that you do. And then I would say, stand up for those who cannot. So I conclude tonight by just saying thank you guys for being here with me. I do understand that there's a few that may be here for extra credit, and that's okay. You're not hurt my feelings. I'm glad you're here. The last thing I say is I wish you guys the best in your careers, and God bless. For questions and answers.
How did CME prepare you for your service that you do today as public service?
Did you coordinate with Maggie on this question? Well, in a lot of ways, just to be transparent, to be honest, I struggled at first when I came to Central Methodist, but I think that because it was a small campus, it was a small university, professors possibly seen that more, and I was able to access that more. So once I realized that if I go to any professor that I have a class in, they're going to do everything they can to help me out, and they did that. And so I think that when I look back, I realized that they were setting me up for success. They were challenging me. And without that small environment, without that opportunity to be challenged by your professors, I don't think that I'd have been able to really believe in myself that I could push forward, especially academically, to pursue greater and bigger dreams. Any other questions?
I got one. Sorry.
You can't ask.
Now, you've used the term implicit bias several times in here, and if anybody watched the vice presidential debate, implicit bias came up, and there seemed to be between the two candidates even some idea of, okay, no idea, but on one hand, what was meant by implicit bias. Do you have a working definition for us lay people? When you're doing it, you're just thinking in terms of implicit bias and how you approach that?
Yeah, so I would consider it as our subconscious response to people or situations. So for an example of that, if I were to walk across the parking lot, and for me personally, and see a large group of bikers tatted up and long big beards and stuff, like my first instinct would probably be self-defense. And that may not be wrong at all, but that shouldn't drive the decision that I make to interact with them, especially if we're working in public service. And so when we did a lot of implicit bias training, we used to show this video, What Would You Do? On ABC, and it had a guy, a white guy that was stealing a bike. And everybody was just kind of walking by, really wasn't saying much. And they had a black guy dressed exactly the same, stealing a bike, and people instantly called the cops. People instantly had this perception, and that perception can be subconscious for a number of reasons, but it's just the way our society, our social constructs develop. And so really the goal of teaching implicit bias is to think counterintuitive. And so when we look at a situation and we say, well, I know that guy is the culprit of this and this girl's not, we need to give both of them a fair chance at justice. So, all that. That's it. Any more questions? We'll be here all night, so. Okay. You guys are an easy crowd, so.